So what is insulin resistance anyway? We've all heard the term. Maybe you've been told you have insulin resistance. Maybe you feel the symptoms. Maybe you're pre-diabetic. But what I have found is no one really talks about what's happening in your body that's causing insulin resistance. And is insulin resistance a bad thing? And what if we don't treat it? What are the downstream effects of having insulin resistance? Can we measure it? Is there a pill that we can take? Do I have any control over it? Well, today I want to answer all of those questions. We are going to take our time and slowly unpack information little by little. Throughout the video, I'm going to talk about warning signs of early insulin resistance. I'm going to talk about the impact of untreated insulin resistance, and we are going to go over some things that you can do to actually tune into your body, tune into symptoms, and get curious about whether maybe you are heading down this road of insulin resistance. But before I dive too deeply into what insulin resistance is, I want to talk about inflammation. We hear this term being batted around frequently, and insulin resistance and inflammation go hand in hand. So let's talk about inflammation. Let's define that first. When we hear the word inflammation, we often think about swelling, redness, heat, pain, maybe like a cut on our skin that immediately turns red, starts to swell. Maybe we need a Band-Aid, we clean it up, and it goes away. Or we twist our ankle and we've got some swelling, inflammation, our body heals, and it goes away. But the inflammation that we're talking about, the inflammation that is very closely tied to insulin resistance, that is the driver of many chronic diseases that we are seeing today, is different. It's chronic, it's slow, and it's not as obvious because we don't feel chronic low-grade inflammation. When we talk about low-grade inflammation, we're talking about inflammation at the cellular tissue level that can cause long-term damage, but we may not actually feel it in the short term. So what is actually going on in our body? What is causing it? Essentially, at the cellular level, we have a reaction and the cells can't respond, communicate, and or function like they're used to functioning. Typically, they kind of self-correct because remember, our body always wants to be in balance. Our body wants to feel good. So in any case, it's going to try to do what it needs to do to get you through the day, to help you feel a little bit better. But with low-grade inflammation, we've got our cells misfiring, or shall I say, not working as efficiently as they're used to working. And that creates oxidative stress, which over time, think of oxidative stress as an apple. When you cut it, it might be like brilliantly white, and within a couple of minutes, it starts to get brown. That same reaction, that oxidative reaction, happens to our cells. So we've got a very normal functioning cell that communicates with the cells next to it, that produces energy, that does all the functions that we need our cells in our body to do. Well, when they become damaged or when they have increased oxidative stress, they stop functioning, they stop communicating, they stop sending signals like they normally would. So oxidative stress is a really big driver of inflammation. Well, what causes oxidative stress? Toxins, sugar, fat, nutrient deficiencies, you name it. Anything that we're doing, putting in our bodies, anything that we're experiencing that stresses our bodies can create oxidative stress and ultimately inflammation. The thing about chronic low-grade inflammation is there's no pain signal. It's more like a constant background irritation. So it's there, it's brewing, but we don't feel the pain. What we might feel are things like brain fog, irritation, sleeplessness, inability to actually recover, for our immune system is taxed and we're not able to get over just simple colds and flus as quickly. We don't rebound as fast. So all of those things start to demonstrate low-grade inflammation. So what is insulin? Insulin is a hormone and we produce it naturally. Insulin is what carries glucose into our cells so that our cells can make energy. So we might eat, let's say, a carbohydrate or a protein. Our body breaks that down into glucose, and insulin takes the glucose from our bloodstream and shuttles it into the cells of our body. This is very normal. This is how the system is supposed to work. But what happens when we start to become insulin resistant is we've got glucose floating in our bloodstream, but our cells are saying, no, I can't take any more of that glucose. So our pancreas increases the amount of insulin that it secretes. Well, our cells and our tissues are still saying we're not taking on any more of that glucose because we are at capacity. We don't need any more glucose. We don't need to create any more energy. Maybe the cell's not functioning appropriately, so it can't take on any additional glucose. So our body starts to shut down and become resistant to the insulin that we have. And our pancreas continues to overextend and produce more insulin because we've got rising levels of glucose, which is another issue and its own separate problem. So our body is in this constant state of just irritation, and our cells are constantly fighting off this insulin glucose reactions, and our body doesn't get a chance to rest. Remember, when we want to produce energy, when we want to utilize the glucose, we want our cells to be on, and the insulin shuttles in glucose. Well, when we have too much insulin and too much glucose, or let's say too much glucose and as a result too much insulin, it's a constant irritation on our cells. And over time, that irritation is almost like sandpaper rubbing on your skin. It just becomes irritated and inflamed. So why do we get high sustained levels of glucose that our cells start to close off to? Well, it could be from things like frequent snacking, high carbohydrate, highly processed meals, low protein intake. If we're not sleeping appropriately, our cortisol goes up. Where cortisol goes, insulin goes. If we've got sustained high levels of cortisol, a lot of times we have sustained high levels of insulin. Cortisol in itself is creating some low-level inflammation without the insulin even being tied to it. So if insulin is staying slightly elevated for most of our day, and this goes on for days and weeks, months, years, decades, what eventually ends up happening is we've got these high levels of insulin. We're not able to utilize glucose effectively. So we then have high levels of glucose. And then we get diagnosed with things like diabetes, type 2 diabetes. And we start to get very specific symptoms prior to this diagnosis of diabetes, prediabetes. This is our body warning us that something's just not right. You feel a slump or significant fatigue after you eat a meal. You crave more sugar or caffeine, particularly midday or late in the day or in the evening after you've eaten a meal. And now you crave sugar to sort of, it's a little cherry on top. You start to notice weight gain in and around your midsection. You feel tired, but still very wired. So you're just not able to relax, likely cortisol as well. And when you do sleep, your sleep doesn't feel restored. You feel like, yes, I know I just slept for 6 or 7 hours, but I don't feel refreshed. I don't feel restored. And just remember when I said earlier, where cortisol goes, insulin goes. A lot of this is the impact of cortisol as well. Okay, so let's tie this together. How does insulin resistance eventually lead to diabetes and heart disease? Over time, like I mentioned, if insulin stays elevated, our inflammation increases. We get more fat around our abdomen, which is hard on our heart. Our blood vessels, because of the high levels of insulin, become less flexible. We want a flexible blood vessels, so we want them to constrict and dilate when we need them to dilate and constrict. We don't want them to stay hard and inflexible because that's when we start to develop plaques and heart disease. So we also want to give our pancreas a break. If the pancreas is constantly producing and struggling to keep up with the glucose metabolism or glucose shuttling into the cells, then we're going to start wearing out our pancreas, and our insulin levels will eventually just sort of do a nosedive. So we've got them just high, you've got high glucose, and eventually the pancreas says, I'm done. That's when many people are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and end up having to take insulin injections just to control the amount of glucose that they're taking in with food. This problem often accelerates for women as we approach our midlife because estrogen is used to improve as it circulates throughout our body, estrogen actually helps improve the sensitivity of insulin. It also helps to reduce chronic inflammation. So as we approach menopause and midlife and we suddenly don't have estrogen, then we've got spiking levels of insulin, reduced levels of insulin sensitivity, and increased levels of inflammation. So it's one of the major trade-offs as women as we approach midlife. So insulin resistance, while it's slow to develop, it develops over decades. It is gradual. We may not feel it, we may not see it, but we can notice the symptoms. Like I mentioned a moment ago, you can put your finger on, I feel a little bit more tired than I used to. I don't have the energy to do the things I used to do. I have a little bit of brain fog. I'm starting to gain weight in places that I never gained weight in the past. So paying attention to how your body responds on a day-to-day basis is critical. And the good news in all of this is it's reversible. If you have the right information, if you're following consistently a good diet, it doesn't have to be perfect, but if you're consistently following a good diet that has lots of variety of fruits and vegetables, low processed food, low sugar, low alcohol intake, it does support your body and you are able to reverse many of these symptoms, particularly if it's insulin resistance, even before it becomes prediabetes. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be extreme. You just need to give your body what it needs to perform, and listen when your body is actually giving you small signals or small clues that something might be off. If you'd like more help understanding this at Juve Wellness, this is exactly what we do. We do deep dives into metabolism, insulin resistance, inflammation, how your body processes nutrients. If you need additional nutrients or supplements, we do extensive testing, metabolic testing, and hormone testing to help give you information and build a plan. Because remember, every body has the right to feel good. Until next time, thank you for listening.